Because of this genesis, we have all kinds of fintech here in Singapore. What fintech really provide are better ways of doing things, cheaper ways of doing things, and increasing financial inclusion. Most of the corporates around the world either are not aware that there's a better way of transferring money, or they do not trust the new way of moving money. Everyone says that banks are not doing well enough, I'm doing much better. And I think that spiel kind of gives the banks a sense that they're here to take my pie. And that is becoming very interesting because
the rise of Singapore as this kind of financial powerhouse, it wouldn't have been possible without a progressive government and a progressive regulator.
They have that lens of policy, but at the same time, embracing the spirit of trying. And only when you try, then you know what is possible.
Hello and welcome to this new episode of Money Travels podcast, presented by Visa. I'm Max.
And I'm Rich. And today we are live from Singapore, joined by Reuben Lim, who is the CEO of Singapore Fintech Association. Reuben, thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome.
We're going to go straight into it. And I think the first topic is when we look at Singapore and we look at that being probably the most powerful financial hub in kind of Asia Pacific, that success story is pretty well known. The subplot of that is kind of this explosion and growth of the fintech scene over here. And in your current seat, on top of the kind of Singapore Fintech Association, you've got a great view of what's going on. What's driven that?
So what's interesting is that Singapore is really a real hub. And I want to emphasize a bit more on that hub part, because when every other jurisdiction talk about them being a hub, they are emphasizing how big a market they have and they can attract players to come and invest and operate within it. But Singapore, interesting, is really the hub for Asia Pacific. In fact, more than half of the Fortune 500 companies have a HQ or regional HQ based in Singapore. So whatever they see in the movement of fintech, it is really taking a reference from that, where Singapore is a business hub.
Talking about your current role, what is it that the SFA actually do? But actually, if we go slightly deeper, what are some of the reasons behind kind of Fintech's boom, and put in the context of some of the end user challenges?
Fintech Association in Singapore turns 9 this year. When we first started, there were only at about 18 members, 100 members, so it's all started by fintech companies coming together wanting to do a community. Over the course of 8-9 years, we've seen a rise and fall in terms of the numbers, in terms of the numbers of fintech, the community, and the size of the fintech itself. And I think in 2025 right now, SFA has a membership of more than 600 members. Most of them are fintech companies. It ranges really from the various sizes, from pre-seed, Series A, all the way to unicorn and listed companies. We do have about 70% of the members who are in B2B space and about 30% who are in a B2C space. And in that sense, what we are seeing right now today is that most of them are scale-ups. 100% of our members have business outside Singapore. So they are either starting from Singapore and they have a regional presence, or they're international companies coming to Singapore and using Singapore as a launch pad into this region. Because of this genesis and because of this heritage, what we have now is that we have all kinds of fintech here in Singapore.
I think throughout this podcast, what we're trying to do is take a look at organizations across the world, but also really explore the impact this is having on kind of businesses and consumers' livelihoods all around the world. So I don't know if you have like a couple of examples of some of the work that you've seen, but dive into why is that important? So this is, a group of 600 people coming together, but for what reason?
So fintech to me largely falls into 2 areas. One are tech companies providing tech solutions for the financial institution. So that could apply to the banks, apply to the insurers, capital markets, bonds, fund managers, all the way to neobanks. So these are tech solutions that provide forward-looking solutions that would then reduce the cost of doing business, make it more efficient, to help them comply better, etc. And then you have another category where you have tech companies providing financial solutions. They are tech companies, but the solutions they are providing are things that require a regulatory license from the regulators. It could be in the form of payments, wallets, crypto, lending, capital markets, digital assets, etc. So these are financial products, and so you need a license. So in this aspect, fintech serve everyone. And ultimately, I think what fintech on the whole really provide are better ways of doing things, cheaper ways of doing things, and increasing financial inclusion, because then it creates a lot more products and availability for people like myself who can participate in.
It's the cost of the for everyone actually, for the companies implementing it, but also for the end users, is the simplicity or the experience that they're going to have at the end of the process or throughout the process. And what we like to say usually is actually nobody wants to consciously make payment. They want to buy something, but the process of payment should become seamless and transparent. What are the big trends that you see in the market, not necessarily just from a fintech perspective, but what we like to say from a money movement perspective? What are those big trends in Asia Pacific that you feel like, are the most important one that the fintech that you're working with are actually trying to solve for?
It is really about how do I make payments a lot more seamless? How do I make payments a lot more easier? I know we hear this a lot about seamless and easy, but until an individual traveler really makes his rounds in different countries, and then you realize that there's really a diaspora of different ways of making payments, and it gets really, really confusing. In fact, till today, despite what we are experiencing, if you go to Change Alley here in Tanjung Pagar in Singapore, you will still see long queues and money changer. And people are still changing fiat and changing cash.
I just wanted to jump in because you automatically went to cross-border money movement. Where are we in Singapore between the difference between a domestic peer-to-peer payment and a cross-border payment? Like, are they miles apart now? What's still to be solved? Has the energy and investment gone into that cross-border piece?
Absolutely, yes. And I think in Singapore, what is interesting is that we have a very strong and progressive regulator. So while the private sector is already moving forward with private wallets to make it more seamless among the consumers, the regulator take a step forward and implement things like what we call PayNow. So PayNow is actually an account-to-account, peer-to-peer way of paying, building on top of a rail that what we call FAST, F-A-S-T. So that's actually something that has been done by the banks. And so already account to account is already seamless, but you still have to key in the full code. And what happens is that they build a layer on top of it by building a unique identifier. So it could be your cell phone number, it could be your identity card number, it could be for corporates, it could be your UEN, your company number. And that itself becomes very seamless in transferring account to account directly. On its own, Singapore, even though we are a very small market, but we have a lot of different private wallets. So probably I myself would have 3 wallets on top of my own bank account, on top of cards and etc.
And do you see that expanding beyond Singapore? Is there any interest or willingness to actually expand that across the region?
Each of the country respectively have to take on the initiative to build domestic payment rails. And once you have established that, then you are in the capacity to talk about building a cross-border. Because if Singapore has the infrastructure of doing account to account, but my counterpart in country X do not have that, then I can't talk about synergizing. It will still be a method of fund transfer using a bank account. So there is a project called Project Nexus that's led by MAS, but it's also now joined by all the other central banks around the region to participate in that, where now utilizing each of their own QR code payment. It is then allow the citizens or the residents of these countries that are involved in this project to participate in this. So in Singapore alone, we already have collaboration with Thailand, with India, where I can scan a QR code and I make that payment. And in my recent trips to both Thailand and India, I tried that and it works beautifully. So I can actually transfer money without using my own local bank account. And I think that is already happening to make it more seamless. In terms of the magnitude, I think the private sector is also playing a very active role in collaborating. There's this product called Alipay Plus. Pay Plus itself is not a payment, it's actually a platform, a bridge. It combines the different private wallets around the region so that they can use Pay Plus to talk to one another. And I think that itself becomes very powerful because it's not only my bank account. Now, if I use GCash in Philippines, I can also use GCash to pay when I come to Singapore. It's at the background and you don't really know. So long you see a badge and it says, your wallet can be used, you use it.
We've been talking a lot about consumers here. What about companies, enterprise? And also, what are those opportunities and challenges that you see for them from a B2B standpoint, like B2B payments?
There's a huge opportunity because I think when it comes to companies, it tends to be more conservative because at the end of the day, it's not my money, it's my company's money. And there's accountability, there is a responsibility I need to play. So in that sense, there is a huge opportunity because if I were to break it down, a B2B payment, there are a few segments. First one are direct payments. So if I buy from supplier, if I sell to someone, I receive payment. And then it progresses to larger amount where there's trade finance. And once you touch a trade finance, then it's a different ballgame altogether. The volume gets a lot bigger. So I think from a digital perspective, from an innovation perspective, both areas are being tackled aggressively. But of course, the part of the trade finance becomes is a bigger topic. When it comes to just payments itself, to B2B, we are seeing a big opportunity because most companies are still using bank-to-bank direct transfer. And I think we can all agree that the fees for this service tends to be quite significant. We tried to transfer some money recently to another corporate account. It took us 6 days, and after 6 days, after a fee of close to 4%, the money is still yet to reach. But I have to confess that there's been a very clear accountability, so it's very clear that where the money is moving to, but it has not been received. But so coming to B2B, one interesting to take note of is the trust in the banking system and the reputation and the branding. So when it comes to corporate, branding is a very important part. So even though the money has not reached, but at least we know that we've gone through a banking system, we are using reputable banks, and that itself lends assurance. So the pivot from banks to fintech, that itself, I think the trust element continues to be a part.
I mean, this is like sending cargo by sea or by air. That's a difference. 6 days for a payment, knowing what we collectively know in terms of the products and services that are available, is not acceptable. And it's certainly in a peer-to-peer payment. If you and I were to send money to each other, and it would take 6 days, I couldn't get away with the excuse that, don't worry, you can see where it's going, because you owe me $10.
Yep.
So I just think that's quite interesting in terms of how far maybe behind that kind of B2B experience is.
Matter of fact, it is not okay. But most of the corporates around the world either are not aware that there's a better way of transferring money, moving money, or they do not trust the newer way of moving money. Interesting, because if it's a consumer, if it's my money, I can try anything.
Yeah,
I will even try crypto if I have to, right? But when it comes to a corporate and it's not my money, then there's a lot of accountability and responsibility. Do I then want to tell my CFO, or do I want to tell my CEO or my board and say, look, let's move $300,000, $5 million off a fintech instead of a bank account? So I think in that context, that trust has to be built. And I think so far, many of the fintech who have been successful in this area are proving themselves to be effective. You actually see that sometimes the banks will actually collaborate with the fintech as well to build some of these rails for money movement. So not everything is done through SWIFT.
Yeah, this is where I was going about that partnership. Because, we hear a lot, is there a competition between the fintechs and the banks? Or a partnership, and which way is the partnership going? Are the banks leveraging fintechs or the fintechs leveraging banks? But what I'm hearing from you is actually they can learn from each other and benefit each other, right?
Absolutely. So if you look at fintech 10 years ago, when it first came out, it does seem like they are giving the bank a run for their money. And partly it's also because they're marketing spew. Right, everyone says that banks are not doing well enough. I'm doing much better, and I think that spiel kind of gives the banks a sense that you're here to take my pie. But I think over the past 5 years, it's very, very clear that everyone is now all serving the consumers, whether it's a corporate or an individual. We are here to make things better for you. And of course, to some extent, there will be some competition, but I think those are healthy competition. But you see a lot more collaboration right now.
At the moment, and I'm not saying I've got a view on this, I'm just saying at the moment, it's quite nice in partnership, and I think there's there's enough pie to go around. Where does this go in terms of that fight for the end user? You're seeing a lot of kind of technology driven companies now starting to offer more than just payments, starting to offer more financial services, and I think you talked about kind of trade finance. It won't be too long before some of these technology companies are moving into that space.
So I guess it's about unpacking the whole sector, and that's something that we have been trying to, but not easy, because when you unpack the whole money movement, it's really very mind-boggling. What we are seeing, or what's leading us to believe into, is that the market, there is something for everyone. There is a role for banks to play, and there are some things that probably banks are better off playing that role as compared to a fintech. So for example, right now, if I'm going to make an acquisition of a building that's going to cost me $1 billion, I'm going to buy MBFC for $1 billion, and I need to fund that transferring the money. I don't think that's going to be executed by a fintech anytime.
Because of the trust aspect.
Trust aspect, the volume, the liquidity, the sentiments, and also the whole package. Because whenever you do such a project, it's not just only the payments. Payments are part of the whole syndicate, synthesizing the loan, and the corporate functions, etc. So getting a legal. So these are all the service a bank play. If you unpack a bank, it's not just only payments department. They have corporate banking, consumer banking, and different parts work with fintech at different areas, etc. So I think there's really a lot to unpack in order to get a very clear indication of is it a direct competition or whether is it a complementary. But I think for now, what we can all agree on, or rather what we're observing here, is that everyone is really working together because the pie is getting bigger. When the money moves faster, there's more liquidity, there's more money to turn it around. And when there's more money to turn around, it means more business. And I think what we are trying to encourage here is that to really grow the pie. And that's why the recent concerns about trade wars and tariffs becomes a real problem, because at the end of the day, are we then saying that the money movements will be reduced because of that? And that would then hurt everybody.
As we travel with the podcast, it's a question or a topic that we keep talking about is how the macroeconomics trends are actually changing the way money moves. So what are those big, I would say, I want to call them challenges that you see in the region, coming from the region or coming from what's happening out there in the world at the moment?
A lot of these conversations that we are having, that we are talking about now, would not be possible if not for the creation of a cell phone, a smartphone. Yeah. Right. So I guess the next thing to ponder is what is the evolution of the smartphone? Because that one hardware device changed not just only the way we pay, but the way we live and the way we do everything. And payment is just one of the effect of it. So I think one thing to really observe is what is that evolution of the hardware. And I think since the smartphone was created till now, the evolution has been not much. It's just better camera, faster chip, compared to the first time you have an app on it. But that itself changed a lot of things. So that's one observation. Another one is demographic. Because in the past, we can really just segment this into three groups. The youth, the working, and then the seniors. But now you have to dissect it into 5-6 generations. And each of them being influential in their own way, have their own habits. And that is becoming very interesting because for a company to, let's say, cater payments, in Singapore, you see that we still use cash a lot. We still use a lot of credit card and debit card, but yet we have at least 5-6 different payment wallets that people use on a day-to-day basis. Even our Singapore Airlines has a wallet.
We couldn't fathom it even kind of 5 or 6 years ago that a fintech would offer kind of deposits and mortgages. Yet they're starting to kind of eat into that, and certainly conversations with banks around the world, they're starting to notice, especially when a generation gets their salary paid into a fintech or a program, because
so
that's the shift in trust, right?
That's the interesting part, because by the time you catch them on their first paycheck, then we are late in the game.
Yeah.
So how do you then move backward? Then we talk about embedded finance, where how do I even catch a lead even before the lead takes place? Because by then it'll be a price war.
Yeah.
Back to consumer banking or consumer payments, really it hasn't really evolved a lot of things. Credit card is still credit card. Offerings are still offering. How in the past, when I was younger, I probably see 5, 6, 7 new credit cards a year from different banks. But nowadays, you don't see that many credit cards coming out. In fact, you see banks reducing their credit card offerings.
And do you see that across the region, or is it like really in Singapore where the card offering is going down to for?
I think within Asia Pacific, what I'm observing is that more and more international banks are stepping away from consumer banking and probably focusing more on corporate banking, wholesale banking. And I think this is evident when you see HSBC, Citibank selling, or even ANZ, in Singapore, they just sell off their retail banking business.
You talked about recent trips to kind of Thailand, recent trips to India. I know you kind of do these business missions. And there's a couple of questions in this. One is around what part of the work that you're doing do you find most interesting? And I know it kind of means quite a lot to you personally to kind of help and use, I guess, Singapore's success as a financial hub and a fintech hub, and how that's impacting some of the other economies across kind of Southeast Asia.
essentially, I think for SFA, Fintech Association, we have two main mandates. One is support Singapore to be a fintech hub.
Yep.
Two is to support our members to succeed. At the end of the day, we are mindful that we are also an association. So there's also certain limitations to what we can do. But primarily, all our programs are split into three pillars: know your industry, strengthen your business, expand your business. And so the programs that are within each of the pillar kind of encapsulate the needs of our members at a different size, at a different point in time. And then on top of that, we are also building different forms of communities. So for example, we have a HR community. So this targets at the HR professionals of fintech so that we can discuss things that are specifically only applicable to HR department. So I'll give you an example, things like ESOPs. Most fintech give ESOPs, employee stock options plan. And you probably wouldn't discuss this with an MNC or a HSBC HR because they don't do that. Right, so those are issues these are things that are very specific to fintech, and of course we are looking at flexible work arrangement. So in Singapore right now, as of December last year, we have this flexible work arrangement policy, and this is again very specific to Singapore. So that now employees have a right to request for flexible work arrangement.
And linking that to what you said earlier, I love your point around multiple generation now, and the different usage that it drives. Do you also help your members to unpack or unfold those different generational behavior and the implication it has for their business?
Max is asking if you have a senior team that you can help him with.
No, but it's interesting you say that because we are actually planning a sharing session on that to address Gen Alpha.
Love it.
Like how to really understand how to unpack Gen. And I probably want that because I'm a father of two. And my two kids are probably around that age. And I have difficulty understanding them.
But that's fascinating, and that's also related to a massive trend globally. But for sure, Southeast Asia is playing a massive role in it, which is the creator economy. It's also a new kind of business, a business that didn't exist when I was young or didn't exist that way, right? And the way we engage with them, but also, the creators are entrepreneurs. No matter, how old they are, and the way they consume, the way they pay is also evolving, right? And is also forcing us to evolve.
Exactly.
Right? So that's a new part of the population as entrepreneur that we need to serve better.
I think a lot of B2Bs are also coming to terms with that, because if you are B2B but now you're doing a B2B to C, then the way to get ahead is to help your clients understand their clients' needs. And that itself is precious because most of the B2B are always very reactive. I'll do what my clients need versus I think ahead for what my clients are looking for.
As a community, a lot of people kind of get caught up in their own business rather than actually really drilling down into, we're all servicing you and I and businesses as the end users. That must be quite a big talking point across some of the discussions and panels that you guys do. I
used to compare SFA to the scenario of, three visually impaired men touching an elephant for the first time. You touch a tail, you touch a tusk, you touch a trunk, touch a thigh, you touch a skin, and they are all elephant. But you need to put everything together. And that's also a challenge that I enjoy about SFA, where how do we bring value to different members at different times? You see, because for members I have B2B, I have B2C, I have 8 subcommittees, I have those who are as small as 5-man team pre-seed stage all the way to unicorn and listed companies. And they're all members. I have banking members as well, I have insurance members as well. And they all have different needs. It's almost like me having 10 children of different gender and different age group, different pain points. So I think the interesting part is how do we constantly get ourselves plugged into the ground and provide solutions that are, or not solutions, provide programs that are useful for everyone.
I want to go back on something that you said, going back to maybe the rise of Singapore as this kind of financial powerhouse. Because it wouldn't have been possible, without some of the things that you guys are doing across the association, but without a progressive government and a progressive regulator. How influential have kind of they been, and how influential do you think they'll continue to be in the growth of fintech?
Singapore has one regulator. Most of the countries have 2 regulators, at least 2. So you have the banking payment side prudential policy, and then you have the securities and the capital markets solutions. In Singapore itself, everything forms under MAS. So that's one interesting part, because then a lot of communications become a lot sharper between the teams. And within this MAS itself, there's a fintech and innovation group. So that leads, that spearhead some of these interesting projects. And if you follow the work of this group for the past 8 years, it's very interesting because it really covers everything that you can think of, from sustainable green finance to tokenized deposit. And now we're talking about Nexus, where you can do a peer-to-peer transfer. So these are all the work that are spearheaded by this team. And it's very interesting because they have that lens of policy and controls, but at the same time, embracing technology and bringing the stakeholders, the players, the fintech, the banks together and try. Whether or not is it going to be a success, I think that's the spirit of trying. And only when you try, then you know what is possible and whether is there a commercial reason behind all this. And I think that's where the projects are becoming very interesting.
I want to completely change topic. I love to know the story behind the story. You're passionate about what you do. You know this ecosystem super, super well. And I like to ask that question. Where had this all started?
I will be the last person you want to turn to for career advice. Definitely so, because I've been through 6-7 different industries, doing 6-7 different roles. So from big MNCs to a startup, starting something, to working in the public service. But what really makes this job tick for me is that I'm able to see how fintech is able to relate across all the 6 sectors that I've been through before that, from aviation to marine, to intellectual property, to real estate investment trust. Every news that I read nowadays has an impact in my sector.
With this, then, what we like to ask our guests is, if we had 2 people, you would like to see 2 people in this podcast, in this chair.
I would like to see a chef. Right, I'd like to see the renowned chef. How does an international chef sees payments? How does an international chef sees it being a core part of his business?
I mean, I'm up for that, for an on-location podcast
we will do
with
it
a
in
renowned
France.
chef. We'll do it in France. Yeah.
We'll do it in France.
Oh, here we go. Yeah.
I think what will be interesting is also to have a homemaker. They bring about a very different perspective. They actually make a lot of payments, and they are usually the CFO of the household. Yeah, so the way they look at bank accounts, the way they look at money movements, the way they try to maximize their dollar, stretch their dollar, those are very interesting insights. The more I spend my time in my role, the more I realize I don't know. And the more I realize a lot of blind spots. And a lot of times when you go for a panel discussion, you go for events, you hear the speaker speak, they echo what you know. We all probably read the same industry reports. We probably are very ingrained in our conversations. Until I recently make their own fund transfer perspective. Then I didn't realize that, oh gosh, it's really so painful. Until I just spent my time in Europe during my last holidays. Then I realized I get to experience how the market is like.
I think on that point, we say thank you.
Thank you
Reuben,
very
it's been
much.
fascinating.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
That's it from Max and I this week. To keep the conversation going, you can follow us on all of the social channels across the bottom of the screen. Is that what we do at the bottom of the screen? I think we do. Yep. And of course, don't forget to follow us on Spotify and YouTube. If you enjoy what you heard today, please do leave us a review, tell your friends, or better still, do both.
Is there anything else that you'd like from me?
The name
What
of the
else?
chef that you want us to...
I actually caught Gordon Ramsay once in my very first
I
job.
would love to have Gordon Ramsay on this.
Really?
Oh, I mean,
Oh.
we would have to bleep out a lot of, because I don't think we have swearing on the podcast. The podcast would be beep.
Oh,
Yeah, sushi. Beep. Okay, fine.